Hello, I'm Daniela. Today's video is a little off the beaten path. We'll be doing slow stitching, but instead of fabric, we'll be stitching on a leaf, a live leaf. I did a previous video where I stitched on a found object, and we stitched around a leaf, attaching it to our work. It was the focal point. But in this design, we're going to stitch through a live leaf. The leaf in itself is our canvas, and it produces an interesting effect. The result is kind of uncanny because it's something nature made with a little human touch, the stitches, the design we make from the stitches. And in my opinion, simplicity is the best here. So in today's video, I'm just going to stitch the word love across this beautiful leaf. I don't know what type of leaf it is, so use what you have in your yard and just be prepared for the results to be quite unexpected. This is a temporary art project. It's probably not going to last very long. It might last for years or so, but you'll need a lot of care to preserve it. As the leaf ages, it becomes fragile, and it starts to decay almost immediately from the time you pluck it from the garden. I press it in a heavy book, and that keeps it flat and makes it a little sturdier, and then I show you a few little tips that I have for making it reinforced in your work. Understand that this is a temporary project. It will change and decay over time. As long as you realize that and you're comfortable with that, I think you'll really enjoy this project. So let's get started. So the first thing I did was I collected my leaves. Now I just went outside, and depending on where you live in the climate, you'll have different leaves. These are just green all year round due to our climate, and I don't even know the variety of these plants. I know that this little one is a gardenia leaf, and these just grow like weeds around our property. They're kind of thick leaves, so these are not very sparse. They're not pines or anything like this. They're just really thick leaves, kind of waxy. And I chose these purposely because I felt like they had a little more substance, so when I stitched through them, there'd be something to stitch through. These were the closest things to fabric that I could find in a leaf. So just make your choices accordingly, and this is a lot of trial by error. Now to prep the leaves, you can look for leaves that are pristine, and these are actually quite large, but you can also look for just leaves. These seem to have holes, maybe made by little bugs or something, a little torn edge, and that's not a problem for me. Now you can see these leaves, they're nicely arched. They have a lot of, well, I call it personality, but they have a lot of shape as well. So I took this leaf and I'll just pull it apart just so that I have the individual leaves to work on. So that's the first thing that I do. And then I just take a little bit of water and I just lightly spritz my leaves. I'm not trying to run water over them like in a sink, but I'm just trying to lightly spritz them. And this is just to give it a very light cleaning. It takes away any dust or debris that might be there, or any little bugs, or hopefully there's no nests, but anything of that nature. And then here I give it a really good pat down here to make sure that it's dry. So I really need these leaves to be thoroughly dry before I start my stitching. So I'll pat all of these down. I like to pat them with a paper towel on the bottom to absorb any of that moisture, and then a dry paper towel that I folded over on itself a few times on the top. This really picks up the majority of that little water that I put down, as well as picking up any dust or anything on the leaf that I don't want to remain. And I do this with all the leaves. Now once my leaves are dry, I like to go over them again just to really make sure that they are dry. Moisture here will really help them deteriorate faster, and that's not what I want for stitching these leaves. So from here you can decide if you want to stitch this leaf as it is, fresh from the vine, so to speak, or if you want to press it so it's flat. So if you want to press it, what I like to do is take a nice heavy book, and in my case I have this very super thick dictionary that I use for pressing all my leaves and whatever I want to press. And so to do that, I'll just open up to a page where there's a lot of weight on both sides of the book. And then I take a little piece of either parchment or wax paper, and I'll put my leaf down and then I'll carefully open it to how I want it to look when it's pressed. Now, there might be a little bit of wrinkle or fold in the leaf, and that's just something that I deal with. So then I just fold the paper on top of it, again, trying to keep it in place, and you can see here it's already getting ruffled, but that's okay. Then I'll gently close the book. And I'll let that stay for 2 to 3 days, or even just overnight. What I'm trying to do is press that leaf to make it flat. Now I have some leaves that I've already pressed, just so you can see. So this has been pressed for about a month. It's a perfectly flat leaf. It's the same variety as this one. So you have this beautiful, lush live leaf and this very delicate, paper-thin, perfectly flat leaf that's about a month old. It browns. It's very delicate. Like I said, it's almost like paper at this point. So if I was to sew through that, I would have to be super careful. So that's what happens if you leave it for a length of time where all the hydration is removed from that leaf. So I can still use it, but it becomes more precarious as it ages. Here's another leaf, and this is kind of beautiful because it's almost transparent. It's very delicate as well. And I just like to have an assortment of these that I can work with on my projects as I need them. But today, we're going to work on a live leaf that isn't pressed. And I'll show you the technique I use for achieving that, because it's not fabric that we're working with. It is actually something that is deteriorating every second that it's still not being used. So I want to press the remainder of my leaves to put them in the book to use for another day, and then we'll start working on our fresh leaf. So we've cleaned our leaf and thoroughly dried it, and that's very important. You can clean it further, and obviously depending on the thickness of the leaf, you can really scrub it down with soap if you want. But since this is a temporary project, I like to clean it up just enough to use and then start my process, because that's what this is for. But one thing that I find very crucial to this process to make this really effective is this tearaway stabilizer. I like to choose a fairly heavy weight. It comes in various weights like fabric, and you can buy it by the piece, by the package. I tend to buy a roll just because I go through so much of it, and then I just cut out a piece that I'll need. It cuts very easily. It cuts a lot like paper, but even easier than paper. I don't believe there's any grain on this interfacing. So what I do is I take this interfacing, and this is going to be a stabilizer just for the leaf and for the stitches. The leaf itself will tear, and every time you pierce this leaf with your needle, it starts to decay even further exponentially from just a live leaf starting to decay. So this interfacing gives it a little backing, makes the stitches look nicer, and it really makes the leaf supported. So what I like to do is I just take a pen and I'll just roughly sketch out the shape of my leaf. Just go around it. Doesn't have to be perfect, because I'm going to cut the end result much smaller than the actual leaf. So here is a rough sketch of the leaf. I'm going to take my scissors and just really cut inside that shape. And I can adjust it further. And if I know I'm only going to sew on one part of the leaf, if I'm only going to do, let's say I'm only going to stitch a heart, I don't need to use this entire backing. If I'm going to stitch the heart up here, I can just cut a little piece of this interfacing just to where I want the heart to go. So now I don't want to pin this interfacing into place, because as I said, anytime you pierce this leaf, you're increasing the decay. Most of the time when we're sewing it and stitching it, we'll cover up those holes with the thread from our stitching. So I could either clamp this interfacing in place by just taking a little clip and holding it down gently on my leaf, and that may or may not bruise the leaf depending on the leaf that you're using. But I like to use a little piece of Scotch tape, or maybe a few pieces, and I just roughly tape it to the back of the leaf. This doesn't pierce the leaf at all, it doesn't cause any damage, and it's a temporary way to hold it in place. So I'll take a few pieces just to hold it down. I will remove the tape when I'm done, but it just helps me when I start my stitches. So now I want to choose my design as well as my color embroidery thread, or whatever you're going to use to make your stitches. Now these leaves lend themselves to beautiful designs. They can be abstract, you can stitch someone's name or just a cute little saying. It's really up to you and how detailed you want to get. One thing that I really like is showing interesting effects in the leaf just so that it enhances the actual beautiful leaf that we see right here. So I tend to like simple designs. Some people like to cut out shapes and stitch around those shapes, which is also another very clever way to make a design in your leaf. So it's really up to you. If you do want to cut out a shape, I would suggest creating your design, stitching around it, and then cutting out your leaf. And that's because those stitches will help reinforce the leaf and give it a little strength. And then just very slowly and carefully, you can cut out your design. I just want to stitch the word love on the side of this leaf. So I'll turn my leaf to the side. I'll just, with this erasable marker, just write the word love in cursive. And then from here, I'll just choose a color of embroidery floss to stitch with. So now I want to choose a needle that isn't terribly big, so I'm not going to choose a tapestry needle or anything like this, but I do like to work with a long, larger-eyed needle. So I have my needle. I'm going to use this very bright color embroidery floss. I think it's just beautiful. And because it'll fit through the needle, I'll use all 6 strands. But if you want to make it very thin and delicate, maybe I'm working on a smaller leaf, I'd pull apart those strands. So I'll just thread my needle. I have a knot in the back and a fairly long tail, about 1 inch long, but I can definitely cut that down afterwards. I like to start at one end here. I'm going to start right at this tail of the top loop of the L. So I have a big cursive loop. So I'm going to just gently pierce through the leaf with my needle, and I'm a little off of my design, but because it's a leaf and not fabric, I'm not going to go back in there and change that hole. Once you pierce that hole, I like to commit to it. And then I'm just going to make my little stitch right down. Now I'm going to pull gently, but unlike fabric, I'm not going to manipulate the leaf as if it's fabric. I'm going to keep that leaf as straight as possible, and I'm going to do all the manipulation because it's very difficult with this leaf to try and keep it preserved as long as possible. I'm going to come up in between my stitches here because I'm doing a stem stitch, and just continue to trace around my cursive L here. I like to use the stem stitch because I can make these loops and these curves nicely, and then when I get to the actual curve, I'm going to shorten my stitches considerably just so that I can make that curve nicely. So I'm coming down here and just continuing around. Again, trying to eyeball that needle to come in the exact spot that I want. And then that's another reason why it's best to use a very simple stitch and a simple design for stitching on leaves, because you don't get a lot of chances to poke your holes. If you do poke your hole in the incorrect spot, you can try and salvage it by changing it, but it will help that leaf to deteriorate quickly every time you pierce that leaf. Now, just so you know, on the back, I'm stitching right through that interfacing. And every time I make a stitch, it's helping to hold it in place, making that tape less relevant that we need on the back of the leaf to hold it in place. Again, I'm trying to find where I made my sketch. The ink tends to disappear quickly, so I have to really look to see where my lettering was, my guide. And I can turn my leaf around because I know that I'm going to come right down here. Again, I'm getting to the end of that loop. So I still want my stitches to be small. If I go too close to where I stitched inside that stitch, it will just pull out. So I have to really make sure that I leave enough space in between stitches that I'm not tearing up that leaf. So you can't really do stitches too small or too close together. So once I come out of this loop, I'll start making my longer stitches again. Now I have another loop down here. So I want to continue on this loop for the bottom of the L. And again, this loop is a little bit bigger, so I can make my stitches a little bit bigger. And I like to use my thumb, as you can see, with my stitches to just brace that thread. It keeps it a little neater and prevents it from tangling up. And I know exactly where it's going. So now I just want to make small little stitches here. And finish this loop. So when I'm stitching my leaf, my fresh leaf, there are some obstacles that you're trying to overcome. You have time, you have the type of leaf, and then you have your design. So in life, things happen, the doorbell rings. So if you're going to stitch a live leaf, you have to make sure that you have time to start and complete your project. If in the event that something comes up and you really can't finish it at this one sitting, then you can just take your leaf between two sheets of either wax paper or parchment and gently press it in a book in between finishing it, but then get back to it as soon as you possibly can. The leaf will flatten out, it will dry up just in time, and there's really no way to stop that. I think if you were to put it in a refrigerator, it would be a little too humid for the actual leaf, but it might be worth a try. So I'm just going to finish this letter. I like to make a nice long loop on my L here. So I'll just come up. Gently untangle the needle and just decide where I want to end the L, the loop, and I have it coming up a little bit here, so maybe 2 more stitches. And I'll just end it right here. So that's the first letter. I'm going to knot it off on the back here. I'll just go back to that last loop, not going through the leaf anymore, just going through that stitch and knotting that off. And then I can trim it down. Now I'm not worried about the interfacing moving, because this will all be trimmed off, or as much of it will be trimmed off when I'm done as I want. But now I'm going to re-knot my thread and start stitching the remaining letters. So now for the O, I'm going to start right at the top. Just on the side here, and go down with fairly small stitches. Again, making that loop and coming up in between. And I just want to very carefully place my needle in between stitches. Continue. All the way around. And again, I just turn that leaf as I go. Coming to the top of that O, so I'll be closing it off with my stitches. And again, I like to untangle my thread. I don't like to have additional tension when I'm stitching the live leaf. You can get away with a lot more tension with the fabric than you can with this live leaf. So I'll come up, and then I just like to overlap this last stitch so it just closes off that O, just like that. I'll come out over here where the O has a tail that starts to connect to the next letter, and create that connection. You can make longer stitches. And I'm now starting that V. I'll just come up a little bit behind where I put my stitch in. Again, untangle my thread gently. And stitch that next letter. I can make the stitch a little longer because it's more of a straight line. Then when I get to the curve of the bottom, I'll just make my stitch a little smaller. And then I'll just continue all the way around. So now my V ends right up here, and then I have that loop that connects it to the E. So I'm going to come back down in between that last stitch, and I'll start creating that connection to the E. And again, I have a little loop here for the top of that letter. And this is because I did this in cursive. You could do this in block letter. It would be a lot simpler. I just like the flow of the cursive letter here. Come around, twist my, untwist my thread, and just make that little loop up top here on the E. Now my stitches get considerably smaller to make this little curve. So I just want to be very gentle when I pull my thread. Turn my leaf around. And I'm going to really exaggerate that loop for that E. So I'll make it a little larger than I normally would. And then once I cross over that part of the E, I'm going to knot off my thread on the back and start a new piece of thread. So I'll come down, and then I'll just knot this off, again with a gentle knot, not too much tension. And I'll just finish off that E. So once again, I'll come up from where I left off, just in between those stitches, and I'll continue all the way around. And I can make larger stitches because it's a very because it's very much a larger loop, particularly than it was on the top of the E. So again, I'll come down, make my loop on top, and continue making that tail with the E. When I come to the end of that stitch, I'll just flip it over and knot it off. Maybe I'll go twice through here just to make sure it stays. So now, to complete this, what I want to do is gently remove the tape on the back. So I'll just gently pull that interfacing. And I'm going to remove the tape all the way around, just so it's not sticking with the interfacing and the tape. And the areas where the stitching goes through the tape, I'll just hold down the stitching and pull off the tape. But on the rest of it, I'm just going to take my scissors and gently cut around the area that I've stitched. In many situations with stitching, I would pull apart this or cut it and just totally remove it. But because I want it to give a little more strength to the leaf, I'm going to leave this interfacing in position. I'm just going to cut around. I can even cut around here just because of the vein of the leaf. I don't want it to interfere with the vein. And that's just because of the structure of this leaf. And so I have my stitched leaf. So now what I like to do is I like to press it after the fact. So I'll take my parchment paper or wax paper, put my leaf just in it, and then stick this in my book. And I just want to press that for a day or two. Now, if I wanted to maintain this beautiful curve, maybe for photos, I can just take this outside, put it against the plant where I snipped the leaf from, and do my photos. And I'll show you some I did with another leaf. But I'm going to press this leaf between the pages of a book just to make it flat. Now in the photos I showed you a beautiful green leaf, and here's the leaf. After I took the photos, I pressed the leaf in the pages of a book, and it's been about a month, maybe 2 months. As you can see, I have my interfacing on the back and all my stitches, and that interfacing helps strengthen the leaf. And this is how my leaf looks now that it's dried versus how it looked originally with the lush live leaf. I also stitched other leaves, and again I picked these at the same time just to show you that some leaves, when they dry, change color considerably, and some maintain their green. So these are the same aged leaves that have been pressed for about a month, month and a half. I stitched this leaf immediately when I picked it using all these cute little stitches. And here's one that I didn't stitch, but I picked at the same time. And you can see the difference in the leaves. Here's the back end of that leaf, and here's the back end of that leaf. So there is something beautiful about stitching through a live leaf. Not only is the process beautiful, but the result of incorporating something as beautiful as a leaf, nature made, with just a little hint of human effort, makes something really that stands out. Now, while I enjoyed stitching on the live leaves, I liked the process and I liked the immediate result, and I even liked the dried result. It's just a little different. I did want to capture that live leaf stitching look, and I found 3 ways to do that. You know, it's not a perfect replica of a live leaf, but it's very close, and I think you might be interested. So these are 3 different methods that I used to obtain the look of a live leaf, when in fact there's nothing living about them. I'll do 3 separate videos in the future to show you the different processes. I found that using the same procedure with using that interfacing on the back was kind of important to creating these leaves. Again, I stitched different designs. With the first one, I just took some fabric, cut out a leaf shape, and then did my stitching, and it looks similar to a live leaf. With the next attempt, I took an artificial leaf, just like a little silk leaf that you'd buy at the store, took it apart and stitched it, and I have a different result. And it's quite beautiful because it has that combination of the natural look of the leaf with something hand-stitched. And the last design I have uses a printed leaf onto fabric. You can even find some fabric with leaves printed on it. I cut it out and I made my stitching. And I think that's very interesting. I found using the interfacing was again crucial in this step as well. I didn't do it here. The leaf tended to bunch a little bit because of that, but it's very helpful, and I'll give you tips for each of the processes in future videos. So that's how I stitched through my live leaf. I think the results are intriguing and very interesting. And as I mentioned in the video, while I like the look of stitching through a live leaf, I don't like the idea that it's pretty much dead afterwards. So to combat that, I have 3 different methods to show you in future videos where you use alternatives to live leaves, but they look very similar to live leaves. Now, nothing replaces the beauty of nature and a live leaf, but these come pretty close. And if you have experience stitching through live leaves, please comment below. Tell me what you liked about it, anything you learned that I didn't mention in the video, and be sure to share your helpful tips. Thanks for joining me today. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up and be sure to subscribe.